Hello, 30 students. This video is going to be about Rousseau. Full disclosure, Rousseau is probably my favorite thinker to read and talk about for a couple reasons. One, I think he's the most interesting thinker we're going to read. And I think he's the most interesting for a couple reasons. One is because I think that like if we were in a classroom together, we could have some really robust debates about Rousseau and what he's talking about. It's a lot harder to have sort of debates about Locke, who's relatively inoffensive, and Hobbes, who most people are like, I don't like that. But Rousseau tends to divide classes. And also the other thing that I really like about Rousseau is he's kind of a sloppy thinker. There are times when his line of argument is very coherent, and there are other times where it breaks down and there's disconnects. And I think those disconnects are important because it shows that these political thinkers that we're reading are human and they make errors, and we can't we have to read them as holistically. We have to try to overcome those errors and think seriously about the deeper issues that the political thinkers are thinking of. Right? He's not as systematic a thinker as like Hobbes and Locke or Plato or Aristotle, who are very consistent always. So he's a little bit of a different person. I also think it's fun to read Rousseau. His writing is very eloquent, and he's often exasperated as he writes. So what you need to read here was the Social Contract, books 1 and 2. Most people tend to focus on book 1 because that's where most of the meat of Rousseau is. We'll talk mostly about book 1. We'll talk a little bit about book 2 as well. So the social contract starts with sort of the same question that Locke ponders, which is what sort of political institutions are legitimate, and what sort of political institutions can create free and equal citizens. Okay, so Rousseau starts with the idea here in the social contract that current systems of government, current institutions, do not create free and equal citizens, and that current institutions are not legitimate. Right? So Rousseau says, infamously, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Right? Political institutions are chains on individuals. They restrict your ability to act. But Rousseau's point here isn't that we need to remove all chains, that we need to unshackle everybody, right? His argument is not that we ought to live in a state of perfect license, right? With the ability of anyone to do whatever they want, whenever they want, free of all restrictions. Rousseau wants to examine what kinds of chains, right? If man is going to be in chains, right? If man is going to be constrained, then what sort of chains can be justified? Okay? And so this is what he's examining here in the social contract. What sorts of chains can be legitimate? And so Rousseau sees a social contract as a means to create free and equal citizens. And in the social contract that Rousseau envisions, everyone gives up everything to everyone else. We create a system of interdependence, right? No one here can declare themselves master or superior to anyone else because you've given yourself up to the collective group. No single person rules over you. The collective group rules over everyone. And so we give up our individual rights and freedoms for dependence upon the group. And Rousseau talks about something called amour propre, which roughly translates to self-love. Okay? And there's this problem, Rousseau says, because amour propre, people are so obsessed with themselves that they neglect the common good of society. And we need to create a system where people put the interests of society over their own selfish, vain interests. We need to create a system where citizens are willing to view each other as equals, with the understanding that our fellow citizens will extend that same privilege to us. Okay? And this sense of equality is key to Rousseau's idea of Republican government, right? Representative government. We have a representative democratic system in Rousseau. But it's not just equality, right? People, when they read Rousseau, focus on this equality aspect. But there's also liberty, freedom, right? You can't have simply equality to have a democratic system. You must also have freedom. And so this expression of freedom and equality are found in what's known as the general will. So Rousseau posits that there's something called a general will, and society exists to discover that general will and enact that general will in terms of policy, right? Every society has one. It is an objective truth, and it is society specific, right? So the general will of the state of California is different from the general will of the state of Florida, which is different from the general will of the United States, so it's very localized. And Rousseau, being Swiss, right? You know anything about Switzerland? They live in the little small cantons, right? People who are Swiss live in very small communities. And so Rousseau visions a system where people in their local communities make decisions for the betterment of their local community. He's not envisioning large republics, or he's not envisioning large countries. He's talking about like small communities that self-govern. And they're governed by this general will. Okay? And so the general will exists. It's never wrong. It is a truth. And it is our job to determine what the general will says. And the general will is not a collection of wills. It's not a mathematical problem where like, a majority of us really want this one thing, therefore it's the general will. No, it's separate. It is an idea of what exists for the common good. So it's not that like a majority of us really, really want like cheeseburgers for lunch. So the general will is cheeseburgers for lunch. No, it's like, no, what is best for the common good? There is a common good that exists, and it's our job to discover it. And we as a society, when we vote to attempt to enact the general will, the common good of the society. And since under this social contract, we agree to give up our individuality for the sake of the community, whatever the community decides, we must abide by. Right? So whatever the majority vote is, that is the will of the community, and that is the will we will be expected to uphold and obey. We must obey it because we have consented to live in the society where we give up our ability to individually decide what's best, to give it up to the community who decides collectively what's best for everybody. This is where we get into danger with Rousseau, because a lot of people interpret this very negatively, right? Rousseau says that people must be forced to be free. People will be, you will be forced by the community to act in a particular way. And a lot of times when people read this, their minds go to like authoritarian systems of government or communism or something like that. But that's not really what Rousseau's talking about here. So for Rousseau, right, when we agree to enter into a social contract, we agree to give up the ability to determine for ourselves what is best to the community. Right? We consent to the community to make decisions for us. We freely make that decision, and we freely agree, Rousseau says, to abide by that. Right? That's part of a contract. We agree to consent. And so when Rousseau says we will force you to be free, what Rousseau means is we will force you to uphold the decision you made, right? You consented to be a part of this, right? You agreed freely that the group would exercise its right to rule over you. For you then to object, right? If you were to object to something that society wants to do and say, I'm not going to do that, right? You would be acting out of the interests of the individual as opposed to out of the interest of the group, according to Rousseau, right? And we force people to be free all the time, right? Like taxes. We force you to pay taxes, right? You are forced to pay taxes. Right? Me as an individual, I would much rather not have to pay taxes. Let some richer person pay the taxes, right? But I live in society. I agree to abide by the rules of society, and society will force me to pay my taxes, right? Or since the playoffs are going on right now, think about a baseball team. If you're up to bat and there's runners on first and second, and the sign comes in that you are to bunt because we would like to sacrifice you to move those runners over, you're supposed to do that. And if you don't do that, right, if you try to selfishly try to advance your own glory and what you think is in your personal interest by swinging away and trying to hit a home run, just the team will punish you for that because you went against what was thought to be what's in the best interest for the team. Okay? And so that's what Rousseau is really talking about here. He talks about people wanting to be forced to be free. Okay? You, the rational agent, agreed to enter the situation where you give yourself up for everyone else. And if you do not abide by it, society will make you. Right? Will force you to be free. You agreed to give yourself up to the group and abide by the group's decisions. The only people the only beings that Rousseau says that constantly fulfill their appetites at the expense of community are animals. Right? What's one thing that makes human human? So this actually goes back to Aristotle, right? There's a connection here between Rousseau and Aristotle. That Rousseau and Aristotle both think what makes man, man, what makes human, human, is the ability to discern right and wrong and rationalize our way to it. We don't just fulfill our appetites and our desires. We're able to reflect and understand good and bad and right and wrong. And so for Rousseau, right, if you are simply existing to fulfill your desires at the expense of the community, you're nothing more than an animal. Right? You are neglecting your reason, and you are putting selfish interests that may be detrimental to the community ahead of the benefit of everyone. Okay? It may sound contradictory in some ways, right? With everyone beholden to the will of everyone else, what sort of freedom can exist in the society? Rousseau's response is a particular type of freedom. Right? It is what Rousseau calls moral freedom. The goal is to create autonomous individuals. Right? Since man is the creator of the social contract, man, right, as a community, creates all laws. We have created the political community, and therefore we have consented to the laws. And since all men collectively rule over each other, right, all people collectively rule over each other, they wouldn't be able to infringe upon the rights of others because laws must be made to apply to everybody. So I can't vote to restrict your freedom of speech because then I would be restricting everyone's freedom of speech, right? My own freedom of speech, right? We have a society of equals where laws apply to everybody. Rule of law. They do that. Laws apply equally to everyone. So each citizen is lawmaker and subject to those laws. Right, it is a radical democracy, radically democratic system. Your decisions are tied to the decisions of everyone else, and everyone else's decisions are tied to you. Right? And we have a rational thought process that allows us to determine what we think is the best interest of everyone. And we also have a rational thought process to understand that we consented to this situation and we must be obliged to follow through. Okay? Freedom, for Rousseau, is the ability to prescribe laws for the community. Right? And that's what you do when you go and you debate and you vote. What the general will is, you are attempting to prescribe laws for the community. That's freedom. You, the individual, as legislator and citizen, try to enact the common will, the common good, when you go and participate. Right? So we are beings that are filled with reason. We're beings who can discern the common good and the general will, and we are obliged to try and do that. Okay? It is a collective theory, right? It is a communal theory. It is not an independent theory. Man is only free insofar as he is part of civil society with a general will. Otherwise, you are an animal attempting to fulfill your beast-like instincts. Okay? You have freedom, but it's not that natural animalistic freedom. It's a moral and political freedom, according to Rousseau. Okay? So that's Rousseau's theory there in a few short minutes.